All right, folks, welcome to the latest edition of the American Victorians live stream. We've got Jim Curtis with us this month. At least once he gets back, he's experiencing some technical difficulties.
Notionally, we have Jim Curtis.
Yeah. He'll be on momentarily.
Once we pay the ransom, so start sending in those Bitcoin donations, and we'll get him back.
How is it I was the one expecting technical difficulties, and yet so far I'm the one who's not down camera or off camera or anything like that.
So far, the night is young, and you just taunted Murphy.
Yeah, I know. I can hear my UPS cracking.
No.
Movement.
Yep, here we go.
Murphy's just sitting there in the background. It's like, Jim too. Yeah. Have you ever seen Murphy and Jim in the same room at the same time?
I have not. I've actually never seen Murphy, period.
No one has, so you can't say that Murphy and Jim are different people.
Like
Jim, you're muted.
You can't see him. He's like Kaiser Sose, you know. Yeah. He's a ghost.
He was a not. Oh, there we go. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Welcome aboard, Jim.
Sorry about that, guys. Old man can't remember shit, so.
Well, at least you have an excuse. I can't remember shit either.
Lovely hotel room in the middle of Lexington, Kentucky.
That's the loveliest thing in Lexington, Kentucky, then.
Tell us, Jim, what are you doing in Lexington, Kentucky?
Saying it right.
Out, Mike. This is a con called Imaginarium. It's another writer's con. It's much smaller than Liberty Con. Between 400 and 500 people. And it's geared toward writers more than, I guess, readers. But there are quite a few books for sale. So I just put out a new one yesterday, so I'll see if I can get a few sales out of this trip.
So when you say it's geared more towards writers, are like readers just barred at the door? Is there a bouncer outside that says like, all right, let me see your bibliography? And if you don't have anything, then you can tell
most of
them, but you're not allowed inside the premise.
Let me see your Amazon page if you want to get.
Yeah. Most of the panels, Coop, deal with writing or running a small business.
Right. So it's for the writers and aspiring writers.
Yeah.
Less than like a celebration of the media or anything like
right. That. Yeah, unlike Liberty.
Uh-oh.
There are
too
writers.
Much. That was privileged information.
Oh, okay, he's back.
The con cut his mic.
It's like, we do have a bouncer, don't lie.
Yeah. Yeah, well, story of my life.
So you were saying though?
So it's right at a 13-hour drive from Texas to get up here. So
well, Texas
I'm dragging
is a 13-hour drive from Texas. So
I will have you know you can make it from Lake Charles, Louisiana, to El Paso, which is 759 miles, in 14 hours.
Well, yeah,
if you do it at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Especially if you
don't have to drive through
tell you how to live your life.
Yeah.
So, Jim, tell us about yourself for our for people who aren't familiar with you or your work. Introduce yourself.
Old fart, retired Navy. Too dumb to get a real job. Went back to work for them. So about 20 plus years active duty in naval aviation. 11 years enlisted, 11 years commissioned, 11 years Atlantic, 11 years Pacific. 23 years as a government contractor / consultant, the last 13 with ONR out of DC, running worldwide testing for the Navy for various programs. A longtime member of a number of the gun forums, the High Road, the Firing Line. Have known Larry since he was in college. And started writing formally in 2014. Had a blog for about 15 years. Published my 13th novel yesterday, and I'm in 16 different anthologies. So I write urban fiction, I write military science fiction, and I write 1870s Western. So 3 different series.
Does it have to be 1870s? Like you're not breaching back into the 1880s or anything like that?
Well, it's starting in the 1870s. It's going to go forward from there.
Okay. I didn't know if there was like a specific reason that you were tied to that era. Like,
yeah, I wanted to be post Civil War.
Gotcha.
Post Civil War and the first advent of the big cattle farms.
All right.
So that was kind of a place to start. So which aircraft were you on? As an NFO, I flew in P3s primarily. 7,700 hours in them over about 17 years. So a lot of time butt in the seat, which is good for a bad back, and being deaf as a post. So P3 Orion, submarine hunter. And we looked at a few other things, chased a few other things. It was always fun chasing the Bear Fs because they were about 200 knots faster than we were if they kicked it in the butt. So.
And by other things, of course, he's referring to kaiju. You're just not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
Those went extinct in the 1880s. That's why I only writes in that era.
Probably the oddest thing was we actually got tasked back in the 70s to go record the interactions of a whale and a submarine.
Was this a work interaction or just?
This one particular submarine, a humpback whale fell in love with the submarine. And every time this boat went out of Pearl Harbor, this humpback would literally follow it.
This is like the submarine gets hit with a stripe of white paint as it's leaving, and like Pepe Le Pew humpback just keeps going after it.
Yeah. So we actually had to go out, and we took a scientist with us who we were told was Dr. Fish. Well, and we recorded
he's not qualified for the whale then. Those are mammals.
Yeah. So we recorded it. He came back, looked at the tapes, and the boat went in the yard, and they found one of the wires from the torpedoes had wrapped around the screw and gotten into the bearing.
Oof.
And it was producing a high-pitched sound that was, as he said, basically a cross between a love call and a, oh my God, I'm hurt, somebody help me call.
It's the perfect honeypot.
Yeah. So once they got the wire off, we had to go back out because the submarine was coming out of the yard. No whales. It's like, okay, you're fixed.
That's interesting, though. You basically made a turkey call for, the Moby Dick whalers and that stuff. If only they'd known.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, if somebody sold that information to the Japanese, whales would go extinct.
Yeah.
They only do it for research purposes, Mike.
Yeah.
Although I will say, I was entirely against whaling because, I grew up at the Free Willy generation and all that stuff until I saw that Whale Wars show on Animal Planet where the sea shepherds and the Greenpeace guys go out there. And immediately I was like pro whaling after that. I was like, yeah, get those whales because screw these guys, these idiots.
Well, those whalers cause less problems than the Greenpeace do.
Yeah.
I personally like the French response to the Greenpeace, which was sink their boat down in Tahiti.
I remember seeing footage of that where the French raided one of their vessels and the Greenpeace activists were screaming at. I remember this chick screaming, "Stop it! Stop it!" Like, lady, you're lucky they had the courtesy to actually board and haul your butts off there before they sank it, or just they could have just left you and set the nuke off. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, well, I have to wonder, has that ever worked? Been like you're getting roped up on a VBSS mission by an anti-piracy unit, and you tell them stop it, and then they just stop it. Like,
no.
like, oh,
I am a sovereign citizen of international waters.
I am not driving, I'm traveling.
Yeah.
Am I being boarded? Am I being boarded?
well, actually, you can't say it doesn't work though, because you are not, a freeman traveler on the land. You are at sea, and naval maritime admiralty courts do apply.
Yeah, but the only thing those people know less about than common law is maritime law. So
does anybody know anything about maritime law?
No, dude, they roll dice to figure out what the laws apply. Like,
I mean, yesterday my wife and I watched like a 20-minute fail army video of boat accidents, and a lot of them are like these large ships crashing into each other, like two like several 100-foot-long cargo ships just went head to head in a canal and crashed into each other. So as near as I can tell from just that, it's pretty easy to become a ship captain, and there's no consequences for just ramming speed. So
don't ever underestimate the effects of alcohol too.
Yeah,
it's like somebody asked me for my opinion on this whole Wagner snot coup thing in Russia, and all I could say is vodka's a hell of a drug.
Yep. When you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is take a shot of vodka.
It's going to affect your decision making.
Yeah.
Vodka and daddy issues. Just my guess there.
Pensacola, Florida. Lovely friggin' Pensacola. 1982 was when I went through. And ironically, the class that I went through with had 2 astronauts in it.
Yeah. Well,
both of them are female.
When you need a trailer park and beachfront property all at the same time, Pensacola is the perfect spot.
Yeah, it is. Until the first hurricane comes through.
And they made a TV show about it in the 90s.
Did they?
Yeah, Pensacola, Wings of Gold. It was one of at least 2 Navy TV shows. It was kind of like a Me Too for JAG. But
oh, yeah. I was going to ask, was it like the unit meets Airwolf, where it's like, half of it's like super awesome, aerial stuff, and then the other half is like Army wives?
Yeah. Yeah, we were watching that one time in a wardroom and overseas, and there were some interesting comments about, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. The unit was kind of.
Go ahead,
the unit was 40% awesome, 60% what the.
Well, the unit had a problem where enough of it was good that it kept you interested, but the way they put the scenes back to back and transitioned, it just ruined all the tension of that previously awesome stuff. So you have, this Delta group being like, all right, we need to track down this, Serbian war criminal and fight his black market, Russian mafia, underlings, and raid this warehouse where he's hiding out. But before that, are the wives' bake sale going to make enough money for the family group and all that stuff? It was just the worst.
Yeah.
It's like somebody convinced the writers that, no, you need to have this domestic B plot to keep the females interested. And like, no, you really don't.
Because David Mamet made that show, and he had just come off of not just come off of, but he had wrote Ronin, right? He was in it with all this stuff and Spartan and all that. But his wife was an executive producer.
Oh.
So that's where I think most of that came from. So, Jim, how do you avoid that in your books?
Well, for one thing, I don't watch episodic TV. I haven't for years.
And his wife probably isn't his publisher. So,
well, and I'm long divorced, so I don't have to worry about that problem either. Now, I don't write perfect characters. I try to write realistic interactions, and my characters are composites. So I have been accused of writing men with tits, and a couple of times I have.
that's very progressive.
Really wish
those weren't the male characters, though, were they?
no.
Okay.
That I really wished I could introduce some of those whiners to the women that were the models for the composite.
Yeah.
Because A, they can outshoot me, and B, every one of them is an expert in their field.
Yeah, well, the problem with that is that a lot of the usual suspects that complain about that really haven't met women in those fields.
No.
And when they write women in those fields and they do make them girl boss is the term now. Both the guys in those fields and the women in those fields hate those characters because you can be competent and get away with a lot of stuff in your field. You can't be insufferable and get away with a lot of stuff in your field. So it's like the one that comes to mind is the purple-haired Laura Dern character in The Last Jedi. I don't know if you've seen that movie. If not, you lucked out. But she was this admiral in command character, and she was just the worst. Like any officer in that position would have been relieved of duty almost immediately. But they played her off as like, oh, she's the one on the right. Everybody who has a problem with her leadership is wrong. And so everybody else in the military who was watching that movie was like, no, I would not follow her in at all. I wouldn't follow her out of the door of a burning building, like,
or out the hatch of a burning ship, as the case may be.
That came later.
Yeah, they exist.
Yeah, I know Brad has some opinions about her as well.
She was actually worse than characters who were written to be bad officers.
Yeah, I was watching.
That's usually saying something.
I was watching a podcast like 2 or 3 days ago. Larry and Casey Ezel were on there, and they were talking about writing characters and that stuff. And the girl boss thing came up, and Casey, who was a career aviator in the military as well, and also a woman. He was like, that's a terrible character. You need to write flaws, but you can't write them be completely incompetent and arrogant and all that stuff. And it got me thinking, like, Lieutenant Gorman from Aliens is kind of the perfect girl boss character that we get.
Yeah.
Except that Gorman kind of redeemed himself at the end.
That's true. But even then, like Gorman wasn't presented as, in the right.
No. Gorman was presented as this is the kind of guy who got fragged in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Or
would you like to tell us about that? I mean,
the officer who mysteriously goes overboard in the middle of the night off a ship.
It's a shame. Many such cases. Sad.
Yep. And it's happened. We didn't have frags handy, so you use what you got.
What to say? I think a fragging incident on a Navy ship would just probably raise more questions than anything. Like,
it's like,
how did you get a grenade?
You're all out of life preservers. I couldn't throw them anything. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. It depends on whether or not the Marines were on board or the SEALs were on board.
Well, we were actually, when the Navy went to the blue digital camouflage for their camis, we were just like, so you don't want them to be found when they fall overboard.
Remember they tried to lie about that and be like, oh, no, it turns orange when it hits salt water. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Right.
No, it doesn't.
Well, that wouldn't work because you're on a ship. You're going to get sprayed with salt water all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have like orange blotches all over your uniform.
Oh man.
Yeah, and this was always insisted upon, but nobody ever saw any pictures of it.
No.
Nobody ever, nobody ever showed up to work with an orange blotch on their blue weird camis.
Yeah, no, that was supposed to be a design function, much less the flight suits with the Nomex. You know, supposed to be fire retardant. Those were supposed to turn colors. It never happened.
Yeah. No, I would have rather kept with the flight suits instead of the frogs.
Yeah.
Because the frogs disintegrated in about 2 weeks.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
My flame retardant uniform in Afghanistan was, they looked just like a set of ACUs. Well, they were the multicam ones, but, you know, they were made of proper Defender M fabric, which is like a very expensive type of fire retardant cheesecloth. And they came pre-faded when they were brand new. And after a few weeks of wear, they were basically just tan. And they would fall apart pretty quickly. They were really flimsy.
Okay,
if they're anything like the frogs,
I figured you would have loved that because you hate camouflage patterns.
Well, I mean, I don't like running around looking like a bag of ass either, though. So, whereas I still have a set of woodland BDUs from when I was in the National Guard 20 years ago, and they look fine.
I've still got a pair of old school woodlands I wore in pre-BRC.
They got this idea in their head. I actually wrote an article about this for Soldier of Fortune magazine back in like 2013. They got this idea in their head that they need everybody deployed to wear fire retardant uniforms because of IEDs. IEDs do not make big fireballs. That people were getting burned in Iraq and Afghanistan because they were riding around in vehicles that were getting hit by IEDs, and the vehicles would catch on fire. That's not a new problem.
Your IEDs didn't do that. When it was just HME out the ass because they didn't have any frag component to it because they were, shit poor Afghans.
All ours were big jugs in the ground.
Okay.
But
I thought you were coming at it from an Iraq point of view where they're actually using like conventional.
It's just ammonium nitrate, right? The thing that catches on fire is all the diesel and the stuff in the truck that runs it over, not the explosive. But they got this. The way it got talked about was that IEDs were making people catch on fire, and that really wasn't the case. But you'd think that the military had never thought about soldiers in vehicles getting burned before. They had. That's why, vehicle crews had worn like the Nomex coveralls for the longest time. But, that's something they forgot about and then remembered. And then everybody had flame retardant.
That was my favorite part about being on a ship.
The brain dump and relearn cycle is unbroken so far.
That was my favorite part about being on a ship, though, and like not actually assigned to it, like we were just hitching a ride, is they would do the general quarters drills, and like the guy that you were doing breakouts with all day like shows up and he's like dressed like a snowman and all that stuff, and you're still there with your sleeves rolled up because like you have no role in this.
Yeah, the fun part was the Air Force bases when they would do the drills and expect you to participate in the drill when you're not even attached to the Air Force base. You're just using their runway. And those guys are out there in Mop 4, roasting their asses off. And then they try to write up Navy guys for not being in a proper uniform and then trying to keep us from going to the flight line to launch our asses to go fly.
Yeah. Which God, I was in a situation where that same thing happened on an airstrip or an air base, and they were like, you guys, why aren't you prepared? And we're like, oh no, we're nips and not in play, right?
Yeah.
The guy was of Japanese descent, so he thought we were making fun of him, but we're like, no, man, we're not a part of your. First off, we're not even a part of your base. Like this is our area. So. Toodles, like I'm still working,
Yeah. Did you ever spend any time in Okinawa?
Nope.
Yeah. I don't know how the hell you and Pete both missed Okinawa.
Because we like
Closest
to
I
actually
got was
go off
Hawaii.
base sometimes.
Yeah.
How much cross training did you do, Jim?
How much cross training did I do with the Air Force counterparts?
I don't think the Air Force.
Well,
really
there were attempts made,
anti-submarine planes,
usually unsuccessful. We did take Air Force pilots and crew flying with us occasionally. And the pilots, after the first low pass and 70-degree angle bank at 200 feet, would usually go to the back of the airplane and never come forward again. The crews usually enjoyed what we did because that was an aspect that they never got to see, because most of their stuff was, here comes another, XYZ fighter. I got to plug this guy, and then he's going away. And then an hour later, I got to plug 4 more of them. And an hour later, I got to plug 4 more of them. Whereas we were down either rigging ships or chasing submarines or doing something. And it was always different. And they really enjoyed it by comparison. And we sent a few folks flying with them, and most of our folks came back and went, I'm not going again. That's boring.
Yeah, flying in a tanker is not glamorous. It's
no.
Yeah.
And flying in a B-52 it hurts your butt because the seats are not comfortable and there's no padding.
I mean, there probably was back in 1962 when that sucker rolled off the assembly line, but it got flat out over the.
No, we need to put stadium seating in here.
There's going to be even less padding.
Don't have padding.
There's going to be even less padding when it's still in service in the 24th century.
Yeah. Well, with the latest extension, the B-52 will go over 100 years of service.
All you need to do is put a Ma Deuce on it, just because.
Yeah. Bring back the tail.
Well, actually had the original tail guns were Ma Deuces for us.
Right? Yeah. Just bring them back, and it's like, nope, we're doing it old school. Everything's got to be older than 100.
Yeah.
They should make the crews carry 1911s too. Just fuck it, go all out.
I heard they finally retired the last 1911s in service.
I was going to say, just what the military needs is another pistol, to send the internet aflame.
Well, the Marines were the last ones with 1911s.
Yeah, because anytime that another unit got rid of them, Recon or MARSOC or whoever was in the market for one, just like, no, we'll take them. We'll take them.
Yeah.
Just hand them over.
I gotta say,
the Marines took away all of our M14s that the Navy had and converted them to DMs up at Crane.
I gotta say though, those MUSOC 1911s were rattle traps.
Oh yeah,
I'll bet.
But they would still shoot.
They'd still shoot, but I had one that the rear sight just drifted no matter how many times we tightened it down.
What's funny about that is I saw one for sale on Gunbroker. It was like a Colt, one of their production ones for sale. It was like a ridiculous amount of money they wanted for that thing. And then I'm thinking about the ones you got that are all worn out. I'm like, you could probably build one out of the Arms Corps that'd be more to like closer to what it actually was.
What it's supposed to be anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you could probably make a ton of money by like whenever like an old Navy ship that doesn't get turned into a museum ship, it gets sold for scrap and everybody's upset about it. If you could get a sizable amount of steel and then turn those into 1911s with like special engraving to denote the ship and all that stuff, you could probably make bank.
Oh yeah.
So go through that Sonoran Desert Institute class or whatever you have to do, and then just hang around shipyards and just be like, oh wait, are you scrapping that? I'll do that. Just give me like 10 pounds of that.
Coop, did you get us an SDI sponsorship on the side somehow?
No, I fucking wish.
Yeah.
But
so Billy Lawfridge teaches a 1911 course.
Okay.
Up the cylinder and slide.
MC on the slide. I don't know. I just saw it on Gunbroker. It was one of the Colt M45s. And those are expensive to begin with because A, it's a Colt, and B, it's a collectible. So,
yeah, it's the collectible part. It's not the Colt name brand. People see that and are like, ooh.
I bought a Colt in 2003, one of their new roll stamp government models, and that was a great gun. You know, it never gave me a problem. Okay, I had one problem. The front sight eventually rattled itself loose and launched downrange, but I got a new front sight and it was fine. So
that's not even how the sights go.
No. It didn't have the it didn't have a dovetail that was pinned in.
Oh, okay.
So it had the little hole where yeah.
I think the oldest 1911 I've got is a 1918. And I've got the one that Jim Clark built for me in '72. So it's a long slide.
Nice. So Jim, how
accurate.
do you translate your experience in the military to your urban fantasy and science fiction and Western work?
Or do you?
Yeah.
Do you or do you? How much do you actually draw on that, or how much do you like?
Well, I've been shooting for 60 years. And I was taught how to shoot by my grandfather, who I have pictures of in the early 1900s, who was a railroad engineer getting on a train with a single action army strapped on his hip and an 1886 Winchester over his shoulder. And I've got both those guns. And I've got my great grandfather's 73 Winchester and 1891 Frontier 6. So,
see,
and I was taught how to
right now.
Say again?
I'm trying not to salivate too much right now.
But I was taught how to shoot by my grandfather and by World War II combat vets. So I grew up shooting Colts because that's what everybody in the Southwest had was Colts. Smith & Wesson was some company out of somewhere up in Yankee land. And, I mean, the guys, the Rangers, Texas Rangers were carrying Colt Pythons or 1911s.
As God intended, right?
Yeah. I mean, they still are in a lot of cases carrying 1911s. So that's what I grew up with. And yes, I use a lot of that in my writing. But I also, like I said, I don't write perfect characters, and the gun stuff is right because I do the research. Because as long as I've been doing this, I know just how much I don't know. And, you know, 6 to 10 hours of research to go back and look up something obscure about a gun that's going to end up in 2 sentences in a book.
All right. So you do the research, but have you ever found that like whatever gun trend is going on now, like somebody will complain that you didn't feature that in your books? It's like, oh, he's shooting one-handed. You're not supposed to do that. It's like, well, in World War II, they absolutely did. They shot one-handed. So
honestly, when I get something like that, Coop, I ignore it because I could give a shit less what the wokies want.
It's not even a Wookiee. That's GunTube. That's the guys who think that everything that Jeff Cooper implemented has always been the case.
No.
You know,
I know people that trained with Cooper.
Right.
One of the guys that's a model for my Cronin character put together one of the first classes in Texas. And he was Jim Wilson's training officer, that Jim Wilson that writes for NRA. He was his training officer when Jim Wilson was a rookie cop. So, yeah, I use those people's expertise.
See, and that's something you would have to be careful about if you're like a gun guy, if you're going to write a Western, like a historical Western, is people didn't have the same attitudes and techniques of gun handling in the 1870s they do now.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want it to be accurate, you're going to have to do things a little. They didn't do things necessarily the way you did. So,
yeah.
He flipped the safety off on his Colt Python.
One thing I'm curious about, Jim, and maybe you know this, you know the cowboy action shooter method of loading the Colt single action, where you load one and skip a chamber and then load 5.
Yeah.
4 more. And they do that because on a real Colt single action, there's no rebounding hammer. There's no trigger hammer block. It's if you have the hammer all the way down on a chamber, that firing pin is actually touching the primer.
That is correct.
For whatever reason, Colt did not put any kind of a safety notch in there. All they had was the quarter cock notch, and that would wear out pretty quickly.
Right.
Now, the conventional wisdom today is that all the cowboys would only load 5 and carry it on an empty chamber. Well, they called them 6 shooters and 6 guns, not 5 guns. How much did they actually do that versus they used the quarter cock notch, or they lowered the hammer between chambers, or just carried it unsafely because they didn't know any better? Or was that
according to my grandfather, he loaded 5.
Really?
He would load 1, skip 1, load 4. But he carried it in, level of detail. The holsters you see in the Western movies are not correct. They're not period correct. Because those are Buscadero holsters that weren't designed until the 1920s. Back in the 1870s, the holsters they carried were basically flap holsters, most of which were Civil War holsters that they cut the flap off of, and they rode high on the belt. But from the research that I've been able to find, and I've got literally hundreds of pages of it, they all, back in the 1860s, 1870s, they never put a live round under the chamber because they didn't have these fancy loops to keep the pistol from falling out of the holster. And if you were punching cattle and you got bucked off your horse or you fell off your horse, the odds were you were going to land on that gun, and about half the time it was going to go off. So based on the research I've done, they actually very seldom loaded all 6 unless they were going into a gunfight or something where they knew they needed to have all 6 rounds.
I think that issue with the Colt and the similar revolvers is probably one of the originator of the perception of that when you drop a gun, it'll go off. Because in that case, it would. You can just tap
hell yes.
And it,
yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people to this day think that if you drop a loaded gun, it'll just fire. And that's not the case with a modern gun, but on a single action loader like that, it absolutely can.
Well, no, it can happen with a modern gun if you have a light strike or you have a soft primer.
I've also heard of it happening with a 1911 or any hammer-fired semi-auto if you're carrying it with a round in the chamber and the hammer down.
If it's a Series 70, yes.
Because if that hammer gets tapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's why, so 1911s, the safety won't engage unless the hammer is cocked. So,
yeah.
Now,
you still got the grip safety, but I don't think that, because with that, if you've got one in the pipe and the hammer down, that hammer's just resting on that fire.
Right.
Yes. That's what Colt later came out with the Series 80 with a bit of a hammer safety, because in the 80s, people carried with they didn't feel comfortable carrying cocked and locked for some reason. So they would carry it with they chamber around and they would lower the hammer on a live round and then have to cock the gun as they were drawing. And
that's just striker fire propaganda.
There was cocaine involved. It was the 80s. I did hear of one incident in Iraq where a soldier was wounded because there was an incident like an IED and they were trying to do triage and get out of there, and somebody tossed an M16 into the back of a Humvee, and it was chambered, didn't have the safety on, and it fired when it landed. Because without the safety on, all the drop safeties aren't engaged. So that's maybe something to keep in mind if you're going to be tossing your AR around.
Well, I know I didn't witness it, but I believe the guy, a Glock 40 that got dropped and hit muzzle down and went off.
Interesting.
But I am assured by the Glock fanboys that Glocks are perfection, and that can't happen.
Most of those guys aren't old enough to remember when 40 caliber Glocks would randomly explode. Not often, but just often enough that you wouldn't forget about it, you know?
Well, it wasn't a random explosion, Mike. It was exploding. They were exploding because the cops were reloading the same round so many times. They were getting bullet setback and increasing the SAMI pressure. And a Glock barrel is not supported. So they were exceeding the SAMI pressure on the gun.
Interesting.
Yeah. You go back and do the research, that's what they found happened.
So,
because it could set back almost 1/8 of an inch.
Well, that's not ideal.
It is. It's a Glock. That means it's ideal. I can only spend $500 on a pistol.
We're going to call it 40 gap, okay?
Well, if you think about it, though, Coop.
I'm kidding. I'm not a Glock fanboy at all.
How many times do you see law enforcement where they have to basically take their gun out, unload it, safe it, and then they come back out and what do? They stick around back on top, reload it, put it back in their holster. Single shift, they can do that 3, 4, 5 times. So that round gets constantly cycled and basically slammed. So what's going to happen to that bullet? It's going to sit right back to the powder.
Yeah.
And it's not just Glocks. It's anything with a 40.
And it's just the worst round.
Yeah. Well, it's, the people that love 10 millimeter. It's basically a 46.
Right. But so they made the 40 to basically defang the 10 millimeter, which undid the entire point of designing that round in the first place.
Yeah.
And then we were stuck with 40 for a while, and then 10 millimeter became popular again, and people were like, "Oh, it's an improvement on 40." It was like, no, this is what the 40 was always supposed to be.
I think the rise and fall of 40 was interesting, and how quickly. I mean, it took over law enforcement, right? It was
right, and that's the only reason that it was popular with anybody else is because that was back when people thought, oh, well, if the cops are using it, then that's the best there is.
Like 60% of 60 or 70% of law enforcement was using 40 at one point. and then in 2015,
yes, Penguin, you're right.
The FBI does this ballistics gel test, and they decide from that 9 millimeter is just as good as 40, right? And then people started. And after that, people who were fans of 40 stopped buying 40. Like 40 just dropped off the map because like you guys. I was like, you guys just now started not liking 40.
Did you ever shoot it? I mean,
they had ballistics.
No, they didn't.
10 years ago, right? That's not a new thing.
Remember the HK fanboys back in the 90s and the early aughts?
I remember Larry got them all stirred up on
never.
Back then, but yeah,
you can be a mile into the mantle of the earth and it will still fire.
But I guarantee you, almost none of them had ever picked one up, much less fired it.
Yeah, because they were expensive as shit.
Yeah.
Actually,
no. Back then they were cheaper. They were
$79.
Yeah.
Like HKs back then were like $800-900 guns when. A normal gun was $400 or $500. So, and now they're still, I don't know, there's still inflation, but inflation is weird with guns because.
Well, it's also the importation rules.
Yeah, because I remember seeing Glock 21 for $600 or so in like 2002, and you can still find Glocks for $600. So
That's
because we can 3D print our own.
I bought my first Glock in '88 for $202 out of the Coast Guard Exchange in Kodiak, Alaska.
All right.
Weird. What an odd place to buy a gun.
An odd place to buy
Kodiak there's a huge Coast Guard base in Kodiak because they do the Bering Sea rescue, all that stuff. So they've got ships, helicopters, and C-130s up there. And a lot of those folks hunt. That exchange probably had better weapons than I've ever seen in a Marine Corps exchange.
Well, yeah, because they know better than to let us have free reign.
Yeah.
Well, the exchange in Quantico,
they're not going to hurt anybody with
weapons.
it. These Marines might try and rob a bank on their 48 hours.
Well, to be fair, that one did steal a tank that time and went on a rampage.
No, he stole a jet.
Yeah.
There was a Lance Corporal that stole a jet and went around for a joyride and landed.
Yeah, that was out of El Toro.
Yep.
He stole an A4.
I think he got like 3 years in the brig, too.
You know,
I think there's a story about Steve McQueen stealing a tank while he was in the Marine Corps.
He was a tanker.
Yeah.
So that would have been plausible. But it's not very fast, and he likes some speedy little bikes and muscle cars. He did save some people from drowning in like an AAV mishap, though. So,
yeah.
Brad still has questions, Jim.
70, late 73, early 74, probably mostly Cameron Bay. And most of what we did was Map 209 tracks, Yellow Brick Road, and market time. So very little in-country stuff at all. We were the ones that got to do the troller ops for the armed sampans that were resupplying the VC off the coast. Because they would come down from Haiphong, come down the coast through either I-Corps or 2-Corps, turn in and be met by the smaller sampans that would run up the river that the PBR guys and the swift boat guys would chase. So it was basically troller ops, go out there and see if you could get shot at. And if you were, depending on where you were, you could call an A6 or an A7 down and sink it. Other places you had to phone home. And of course, as soon as you phoned home, the trawler would immediately turn and run for the beach. So somebody had a direct link to Corps headquarters.
wow.
So every once in a while, you would forget which area you were in.
Oops.
Oops, sorry.
well, you got to in order to stay one step ahead of the Walker ring. So.
Oh, yeah. I have a Walker story.
Oh, if you're allowed to, please go all in.
Yeah.
Send it.
Yes, Brad, every ship and a lot of aircraft had problems with the AGIs, the trawlers. And yes, those trawlers, most of them did have torpedo tubes. That was not actually proven until the mid-'80s when one of them was caught in a yard in, I believe, Sebastopol. And somebody got a picture, and it actually had 2 torpedo tubes in the AGI. But a friend of mine probably got the perfect get even with a trawler off of Guam back in 76. They were on the Kitty Hawk, and he was in an A3, all 3 dead, out of Q1, VQ1. And they launched about the time the trawler cut across in front of the carrier. So the carrier had to decelerate. And the A6 went off the front and sank. And not even thinking about it, they did a max fuel dump as they went over the AGI.
Oops.
So they covered the AGI with jet fuel. And you could pump out a lot of fuel if you do an emergency dump out of an airplane. That's why you have to do it legally 6,000 feet or above. Well, they did it at about 100 feet. And that AGI never bothered the Kitty Hawk again. Matter of fact, that AGI went away.
Hope nobody was better not light up a smoke right there, comrade.
Yeah, I'm sure it was different out at sea, but wasn't the entire point of the aardvark to just dump fuel like 30 feet above the ground and then light it on fire with their afterburner?
Well, the Vark was a different scenario. Most people don't know this. The Navy actually had a squadron of Varks.
Oh yeah, they which one? They tried to model the Tomcat after the aardvark.
Aardvark was originally supposed to be a joint Air Force and Navy fighter. Yeah. It was supposed to be
the Navy accepted 12 of them, never put them on a ship, and flew them to the boneyard. So there are 12 of them sitting out there brand new.
It did not perform very well in carrier tests. It's a big plane.
Well, yeah, it's a big plane, but the reason they switched over to the Tomcat was because the nose cone was not big enough for the radar that they wanted on their interceptors.
Yeah. The other problem with it is, quite honestly, by the time you got through beefing up the aardvark to meet Navy shipboard standards, it was too heavy.
Yeah.
And it was
because the Navy F4, the one direct comparison I know is the F4B. The Navy version was 947 pounds heavier than the Air Force version because the beefed up landing gear, the beefed up tail hook, and the beefed up structure in the airplane to take the landing impact.
That's why I always get annoyed when people compare like the Air Force fighters versus the Navy fighters. Like, oh, the F-15 is so much better than the F-14 or the F-18, whatever. It's like, yeah, but can it land on a boat?
No.
It's like you have to factor that into the equation. So
now you can land on the boat. The C-130 you can land on the boat, and we figured we could land a P-3 on a boat if it came down to it.
A B-25 could take off from a boat, but I don't think anybody ever tested landing on it.
It had a hard enough time landing in China.
And they would land. They could not get stopped in time.
Yeah.
So that's why they were craned on.
You also have to imagine being the first plane in that stack, because back then they didn't have them wait off to the side and then taxi them onto the runway and then catapult them off. It was just they were in a row, and if you were the first in that line, you had that much less runway to pick up speed on. It's like, imagine being the first guy in that stack.
That's why Doolittle was in the first airplane.
Yeah.
And they had no weapons on board and no ammunition on board. The guns were
had to make weight somehow.
Yeah.
So your Walker story, please do tell.
Walker. I was involved with special missions for a number of years. And we used to joke about Walker, the Soviets reading our mail. Because we would catch a guy with problems, and all of a sudden the guy would turn around and go back home. And come back fixed 6 months later. Well, when Walker got captured and we found out what he had been giving them, interestingly, the Soviets never asked for hardware. The only thing they ever wanted was key map. So they were literally reading our messages. So we were telling them what was wrong with their boats so they could put them back in and get them fixed. Which was just a tad frustrating.
It's kind of hilarious that if you think about it, that our assessment of their hardware was so much better that we could assess bugs better than they could. When they had the stuff right there in front of them.
Significantly different technologies.
Yeah.
They were better with mechanical stuff. Their mechanical capabilities exceeded ours.
Except when it came to recovering their subs.
Yeah. Probably by a factor of 2 to 3 as far as their mechanical perfection. Because they did everything longhand. They didn't brute force math. They did it longhand, or what they call elegant math. Whereas our guys would take and throw it at a cray and let the cray beat on it for a while and then take the output and go do whatever they're going to do. Soviets didn't do it that way. And they would take that design and then, for example, the Taranto PPG, the deperming system on that boat was a 1,340 tooth gear that was driven off the gyro compass. And it actually did as good a deperming job as we could do with computer systems. And this was a throwaway coastal gunboat that nobody cared about in Russia.
For the any younger members of the audience, the Cray he's referring to is a Cray supercomputer, which back then, I don't know what the equivalent of it is nowadays, but it was a wonder back in the day.
Yeah. Well, let me see. The last.
Well, if our audience doesn't know who John Anthony Walker is, they probably don't know what a Cray is. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Google it.
Yeah, it's a bad part about being the old farts. I remember all these things when they were new.
Yeah.
I can remember when digital signal processing chips were brand new. And one board of those was $500,000.
Whew.
And that was when $500,000 went a lot farther than it does now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you probably had like 2/3 of the middlemen too. It's like,
yeah. Hey, Josh. Now I'm pretty much done with the Gray Man because I made a mistake with that. That was only going to be a trilogy, and people got too interested and too invested in it, so I had to keep writing it.
such a terrible problem to have.
Well, it was because I was writing sequentially year to year, and each book was about a year. And I wrote to 2019 or 2020 and went, damn, I can't go any further with this because I don't want to get into, other issues. And then ended up, he was aging out, and I'd pretty much done everything I wanted to do with the series. But
there comes a point you just got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
If we've seen anything from recent events, it's when a series won't die that it becomes a major problem.
They're still making Walking Dead TV show, guys.
Dave Weber, bless his heart. I was talking to Dave a couple of years ago, and he said he never intended for Honor Harrington to be more than 6 books.
Yeah, you can kind of tell after a while. He's just like, this is like the 3rd generation of her family that's now commissioned in the military.
Yeah, and I didn't want to do that. And that's why, and then, of course, old Mill Sci-Fi thing, I basically did the same thing there. Imperfect character, used some of the knowledge that I had from R&D on the weapons that they were using. And then the 1870s Western stuff. And I've got some other stuff I'm playing with. Because there'll probably be maybe 1 or 2 more books in the RimWorld series. And I'll go on to something else because, you make a great point, Coop. I don't want to burn out. I mean, Pete, what's your longest running series?
Longest, I don't know about word count, but the longest for number of books is Blackhearts, and that's at 13. And I've had to basically put it on hiatus because not only do you have the creative side of it, but also it's just interest wanes with us on the commercial side. Interest in a series wanes over time.
Yeah,
that's all right. Phoebe Waller-Bridge will bring it back.
I mean, Maelstrom Rising was a great series, and I think a great pacing.
Thank you.
And, it lasted long enough that from a reader perspective, you got to do everything you wanted to do with it. And you had multiple plot threads going on in the different books.
Yeah. But it did reach the point where it's like particularly after 2020, 2021, it's like, I got to wrap this up and reset because
because
you
now
were
you're in
getting
a race
too
with the
close to what
Chinese
was
for
actually
actually
happening.
doing it.
You know,
yeah, especially that last book was definitely felt like a race.
I think it's something that, you know, it's okay to just have a story in mind and then just tell the story. And it can be tough because, especially if you start making money off of it and your readers just want more and more and more, it's, you know, you might just want to keep going. You know, you don't want to shoot your cash cow, but there's always that chance that the quality will begin to suffer after it turns into The Simpsons if you let it go on too long, or it can, you know, it just, so sometimes just having a plan for the story and then just ending it on where you want to end it is, I think that can be a good thing. Heck, my last two books were just one-offs. Just they weren't a series at all. It was just one and done, and it's a story.
Yeah.
And I like that because I'm able to tell people who haven't read any of my work or anything, here's a book you could read. It's not, you don't got to worry about tracking down anything else in the series or you're picking up. It's a story by itself. It's a novel, and that's all there is.
You should start marketing that, like putting on your books the first and final part of the whatever series.
I honestly, I think in genre fiction, they're the minority these days.
Yeah. Some of that has to do with the marketplace.
Yeah.
Because it boils down to sometimes, at least from what I've seen, the most hardcore part of your audience are the ones who want more.
Yeah.
The ones who want a series, the ones who devour the next book in 24 hours and then ask, where's the next one? I just started it. It's going to be a while.
Yeah.
Oh, he's never finished this. Fuck that.
But I also think that long series are a little more doable in something like science fiction than thrillers, because the thrillers have to have a certain grounding. And after a while, you start to inevitably and unavoidably, you start to diverge enough from the real world situation that it's either going to become science fiction, at which point you got to decide, is that where I want to go? Or am I going to try and stick with the thriller audience?
Or you get overtaken by events like what happened, like Tom Clancy when the Soviet Union broke up.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's like, Pete, are you talking about Jack Ryan Jr.?
Oh,
well, I think
it's got to stay grounded, but let's have our
when
virtual reality cops go in there.
I think I wrote you an email when you were doing the last Maelstrom Rising about, well, are you going to pull this from the headlines or not?
yeah, it was feeling pretty close. Of course, I was picking Jim's brain for some of the stuff on Option Zulu too. So,
well, that's why I do have a little bit of experience at that.
And you know that part of the world a lot better than I do.
Yeah,
you know, the Tom Clancy thing where it diverged from the real world because the man ran out of countries for America to go to war with, so he had us go to war with Japan, right? So, again.
As God intended.
Right.
Yeah.
And this time it's personal.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
because the last time wasn't.
Because, so that's why, like, when I wrote Dead Six with Larry, I talked him into just, let's just have a completely divergent, its own world. With its own history and everything. Let's just change it up. So that way we don't got to worry about any of this stuff because it's a completely different setting. Yeah. And he was really skeptical on it. I had to sell that idea to him, but I think it worked out.
And then he ran fucking rampant with it.
At my encouraging.
I still have the original copies of y'all going back and forth on the firing line.
Oh.
I pulled those down.
So there's no deleting it, Mike. You can never get rid of it.
Yeah.
In fact, we may have to see about. Might have to get Jim together with Tony and see about publishing "Welcome Back, Mr. Nightcrawler," the director's cut.
A special appearance from Gecko 45.
Oh God.
Some people in the audience may need an explanation as to who Gecko 45 is.
Oh, that's a lot of. We don't. We're going to get way too off track. We start getting into gun board deep lore here. This is
but if you continue Dead Six on like a successor series or anything, he definitely has to be the big bad for that one. Forget Big Eddie or anything like that. It's all it's just some idiot on a gun forum who accidentally starts the apocalypse.
There were a few out there.
Oh yeah.
Thank God I was never a moderator on that damn forum.
It's
Gun
funny.
kid.
Modern social media. I mean, this was social media before anybody called it social media. I met a lot of my friends on there, and that's like we actually socialized. We'd go to like meetups and shoots and stuff, and
yeah.
And but then later on came Facebook and all that, and Facebook kind of killed the bulletin boards. Eventually, it got replaced by Facebook groups.
But now it's Reddit. Like Reddit is a forum, except there's like even less sense of community, and the search function sucks.
I actually think Reddit is older than Facebook. Come to think of it, but
who cares? It's just as bad.
But
it's a cesspool of degeneracy. It needs to be
what I've seen, what I'm trying to say though is from what I've seen, for as silly as the gun boards could sometimes be back then, they were still way better than what you have today with like Reddit and some of your Facebook groups. So even
V Bulletin is the ideal template for social media. I don't know why we went away.
It was peak culture. It's downhill from there.
The only gun forum I still follow is Sniper Side, because that one stayed pretty true to form. But also, they're pretty ruthless about who they allow on.
Well, yeah, they've seen what happens when you let the Tumblrites in.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that like most successful old school forum communities have lasted this long by just running off of the MO of how do we prevent this from becoming like Twitter. Yeah. Like, how do we scare off any new people so that we can make sure that this just stays like our own little, sacred water buffalo lodge, as opposed to opening it up?
Yeah. Robert made a good point. 4chan. Reddit is just 4chan without sophistication.
Well, there was a very good list of basically what each social media platform really is characterized as.
Yeah.
And it's like 4chan was smart people acting like retards, and Reddit was retards acting like smart people.
Yeah.
Fucking Tumblr was retards acting like retards. It was just basically how do we fit this all in?
Which level of retard are we dealing with here?
Yeah. So you go back to the early days, it was literally BBSs and CompuServe, and you had to be fairly smart to even be able to get on the internet in those days. Ben Yallo is a friend of ours. He now lives in Dallas, but he ran the second largest network in the world before the World Wide Web was merged, and that was at City University of New York. And he came up for dinner a couple of months ago on our group dinner, and he brought a copy from the late 1970s of the entire internet, every sysop in the entire internet. And it was an 8.5 by 11 book that was about a half-inch thick. And it had names, addresses, phone numbers. And that was the entire internet back in the day.
You know what?
It would return.
Before I say this, I want everybody to know the irony of saying this on a YouTube stream is not at all lost on me, but I want to say that going to the World Wide Web was a mistake. Look what happened.
Well, there are actually 3 World Wide Webs, not just one.
And all 3 of them are probably terrible. So,
Well, are we considering like intranets part of the World Wide Web? Are you factoring in like China has their own domestic internet that's not attached to the greater?
No, there are 3 versions of the World Wide Web.
Okay. Are you talking about like ARPANET, Usenet, and
well, there's a research net, there's the generic World Wide Web, and then there is a military version of the net. So there are actually 3 distinct versions, but they all run through the same tier 1s.
Right.
But yeah, like I was excited as anybody else when the internet came around when I was young, and now I'm looking back. In a lot of ways, I think it was a mistake. We need to go back.
Yeah.
Guys.
Look, when people started arguing about how to pronounce the graphic interlace format, that's when everything went downhill.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a double-edged sword at the very least.
Yeah. Well, the humor, all the memes that you have today basically came from the secure fax machines.
that was the original sitting on the copy machine and just printing out 5 pages of your ass.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is when you use a secure fax machine back in the day, the first page had to be unclassed in case it didn't link properly.
Right.
So everybody would print up these jokes.
Reader, you
run them through the fax machine first. Yeah.
Somebody just circle gamed me on the
yeah
on my watch of all things.
How are we going to resolve this over?
Yeah, he's blowing my phone up too. We see you, reader.
Does anybody find it weird that they just made another Mission Impossible movie, but I remember when the first movie in that series came out, and like an inordinate amount of screen time was devoted to him just going through Usenet chat rooms and listservs and it's like, how far we have come in the span of this film series. We've gone from Usenet to
that
Web
3.0. Spans what, 30 years?
Speaking of series that need to find an ending,
apparently there's at least one more.
Apparently, the movie series is going to have run longer than the TV show.
The movie series is going to go until Tom Cruise finally kills himself in a stunt
or breaks his leg running. The problem is every episode or every movie in this the franchise, it's called something different, but it all connects to the other ones. And then they call this one Part 1. I was like, you could have just called it whatever it was, and then people would have seen the next one. It's like you didn't have to do what is it, Dead Reckoning Part 2. You could have just called it something else.
But we were saying about Tom Cruise dies in a stunter, because he sure as hell isn't going to die of natural causes. I don't know if it's like the Scientology wizardry or a pact with the devil or just adrenochrome, but
that's why he can still make successful movies, is because like they can't do it by committee because his thetan level is high enough or whatever that he can just big time them into be like, nope, we're doing it this way.
He is the committee.
And that really came out with Maverick too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because Paramount would be like, no, it's got to be this way. One of the pilots has to upstage you and show how cooler she is, and be like, no, Maverick's staying Maverick. Like this is my character, and we're doing it this way. So
there was some bullshit in that movie, though.
You don't say.
He threatened to summon. He threatened to summon L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
So
one of the funnier ones. They actually used some of the Top Gun guys to fly the stunts.
Right.
And the skipper was supposed to double for Tom Cruise. Well, the skipper is at the time was about 7 inches taller than Cruise. and has typical fighter pilot bull neck. So it was supposed to be shot from behind. So they had him put on the Maverick helmet and get the cameras in position. And went, oh, that's not going to work. We've got to find another pilot. So he actually
who's just passing the height and weight standards? Get over here.
Yeah.
Aren't you a little short to be a Navy pilot?
Yeah. But the problem with it that a lot of us had with it was the F-14 sequence at the end. Because if he had actually clipped anything with that F-14, it'd have been a ball of flames.
Well, yeah, and he also he didn't like the flaps were in the worst position for a short takeoff too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was kind of funny that, and a little not just funny, but a little like, okay, you guys basically ripped off the trench run from
Star Wars.
No,
Star Wars.
Okay, but there was what was the Iron Eagle 2 did it with fighter jets.
Yeah.
And Top Gun Maverick ripped off Iron Eagle 2. Because
Star Wars initially ripped off the bridges of Toko Reed.
Yes.
Yeah, it was based off of the Dam Busters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a rip off. Yeah.
It's funny though, because Iron Eagle was like the also ran B movie answer to Top Gun, right? Because in the 80s, like right up until like very recently, like the Air Force never get through any support for like movies and stuff the way the Navy did, right? That's why all the Air Force movies from the 80s are all with Israeli jets, including the Iron Eagle movies and all of them. So to see something in a Top Gun movie they did first in a low budget Iron Eagle movie 30 like almost 40 years ago, I just like, oh my god, this is awesome.
You know what? I'm less upset about like ripoffs or.
I wasn't actually mad. I don't even know if there's really a connection, but I saw that and I saw the similarity. I was like, no way.
Oh yeah.
I will fully allow everybody hates remakes these days because they all suck. But if you remade a movie that like had the seeds of a good idea but bombed, it's like that would be something that we would all welcome. It's like, all right, let's see what you can do, you know, now that you have the resources and technology and all that stuff. But no, they take all the really successful classic stuff that's perfect just the way it is and remake it and do it work.
And screw it up.
Because they're afraid that if it bombed before, it might bomb now. So they can't
We're going to add all this woke stuff.
So they'll just screw up the good stuff.
Yeah.
As far as, I mean, if you take 10 seconds to look at it, it's like, yeah, there's no way Maverick is remotely a realistic movie. It was
the GPS jam. They had GPS jammers, so the F-35 is completely useless.
And it has nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that they couldn't afford the usage fees for the F-35s. That the
Navy did not want cameras in those cockpits.
There's no two-seat F-35, so they couldn't have somebody fly Tom Cruise around and want to get the actual cockpit shots.
Right.
They wanted to fake it, and they didn't want to do that. So
basically, there's plenty of reasons not.
You shut your mouth.
I wouldn't say it's better, but it was a decent send up to the original.
From what I understand, the recent movie was more faithful to the book. I've never read the book, so
I mean, if you are going to remake a movie like that and it is an adaptation, that's your one like mulligan or excuse for all the changes you make. Just be like, I don't know, we made it more like the book. We're adapting the book. We're not remaking the movie.
I thought that the True Grit remake was actually pretty good. It's not a John Wayne classic, but it wasn't a bad Western. I didn't think so.
No. I'm not saying it was a bad movie, but
they need to not remake The Searchers ever.
No.
What I'd like to see remade is Starship Troopers, and make it original to the book.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. That's your get out of jail free for changing it. Is be like, hey, the original really wasn't a great adaptation. We're going to do a straight up adaptation.
Yeah.
the original wasn't even supposed to be Starship Troopers.
No,
it was like
it came later.
When Outpost something or other.
Yeah. Well, that was
they got the rights to Starship Troopers, so they
did the same thing with the iRobot movie with Will Smith. It was originally something completely different, and they were just like, I mean, this would make sense if you included the 3 laws from Isaac Asimov, and they were like, "What's that?" And then they read the book, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we can buy the rights."
Yeah. So. Yeah, and Asimov was dead. I don't think the family fought it that hard.
I mean, I'm not a huge Asimov fan to begin with, so it doesn't offend me to my core. But
I mean, I watched the Foundation TV series on Apple TV, and I haven't read the books. I'm gonna admit that right now. I thought the show was okay. From what I understand, it's somewhat faithful to the source, but they embellished, they added some stuff to kind of like fill it out. But
yeah,
I wasn't super big on the whole like smart math wizard saves the universe through his prescient math powers type thing. But
Dexter's Laboratory, the motion picture,
that would have been so much better.
Oh, Robert makes a great point. Aliens is probably closer to a faithful adaptation of Starship Troopers than Starship Troopers is.
Yeah, if that's the benchmark, yes. But
there was a good Starship Troopers IP show, and there was an animated, like a CGI animated TV show called Roughnecks, the Starship Troopers Chronicles. It was a kids show.
I have seen it, and the kid show stuff really brings it down.
It does. I mean, it was made for like TV Y14, right? So it was not.
Yeah, but its airtime was 5 a.m. So it was like if you had to commute 2 hours to get to school, you might see it. But
I remember seeing it in the afternoons, but I didn't grow up where you did, so we had.
So that's one thing that I missed is with what I was doing and all the time I was on the road. I got out of the habit of ever watching episodic TV because, I'd get one episode and miss 3 and come back and try to watch it and go, what the hell did I miss? And you couldn't get replays. So I just gave up on it.
I think that's kind of why, to go back to the, like, why series are way more popular in the market right now than standalones is because all across of media, they're adopting sort of like the Netflix model where we'll release a season of a show that you can watch, and everything's about long form serialized content now rather than episodic. Like if they tried to make a Star Trek style syndicated, everything has to be like a self-contained episode show, it would not fly today.
And the thing is it's interesting because that model didn't actually work that well for Star Trek, in my opinion. It ended up being like, it was like a whole before there was TV tropes, there was the list of science fiction cliches, and a lot of them were from Star Trek, like how they'd come up with a solution for a problem for one episode, then forget about it.
Forget about it, or you always knew exactly who the villain of a story was going to be because they showed up in that episode. And it's like, okay, well, he showed up here, he's going to leave here. So, he's dead.
But on the flip side, we've talked about this before. I think a novel is already long form content. I am skeptical as to how well the idea of trying to turn, books into like YouTube style content creation is going to work out long term. Guys are turning them out as fast as they can, and there's a limit, right?
Well, have you done it? Turned any of yours into audiobooks?
I have, yes. It's not the last 2, but yes.
So right there, you're looking at the average novel is around 10 hours. So there's your long form format right there.
Yeah. The problem is if you take like a normal TV or a normal book and translate it to the TV show, a lot of the length of a book isn't just stuff happening. It's describing the setting and the scene and what's going on in people's heads that would be conveyed visually in just like, you know, the character makes a certain face or glances a certain way, or their tone changes and stuff like that. So there's a lot of visual shorthand for that cuts away from the length. So if you want to increase the length, you have to pad the shit out of it, and that's where you get like the Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah,
where it's just they're just adding so much extra crap in there that it detracts from the overall story.
I've got a script for one of the Lethal Weapons, I think 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's over 50,000 words, and that includes all the scene setup.
Right. So scripts, like screenplays, I think the general rule for as long as they've been doing them is like 1 page per minute, because they know there's going to be give and take where like a page isn't really going to take 1 minute to film, but it's all the stuff that's not included in the script, like, you know, establishing shots, stuff like that. So,
but you know, you
it's
talk
definitely
about
different from actual literature.
Yeah, you talk about readers. One of the things that we were talking about at LibertyCon is the fact that readers are now not wanting to start a series until the series is complete because of George R.R. Martin and who's the
Patrick
other
Rothfuss?
turkey that? Yeah, Rothfuss.
Yeah.
You know, because here are 2 guys that, you know, promised there's a 3rd book, and they've never delivered. So I think that burns those of us that try to write, you know, a 3, 4, 5, 6 book series, because you don't get the sales until you've basically done the series and completed it. And then people will go back and buy all 6 of them and read them at once.
Yeah, and it definitely
Gerald,
burns. It burns like new authors too. It's like if your first book doesn't sell, your publisher might drop you right then and there. You know.
Yeah,
it's hard enough to write 1 book in advance and get it sold. Nobody's gonna buy a 6-book series. You know, no one's gonna. If you're a new author, you're probably not even gonna sell a trilogy. You might sell 1 book to a traditional publisher. Now, I know the rules are different for indie, and a lot of what the indie authors are doing are they're kind of going back towards like the pulp novels, like kind of where they're just shorter and more focused. And
yeah, but at the same time, they're still trying to make them like longer books to cash in on the Audible credit thing if they ever get that adapted. Because certain people won't. Nick Cole was talking about this. Certain people won't spend their Audible credit unless an audiobook is of a certain time length, so that they feel like they're getting their most money's worth out of it.
9 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
You know, and that's.
I don't mean to like, you know, knock the preferences of the audience out there, but holy shit, some of you guys. We're talking about a matter of a few bucks here.
Remember when books used to be like 50 to 80,000 words?
It's like,
I got a whole bunch of them on the shelves in here.
Yeah.
I spent more
Barry
money
Sadler, Louis L'Amour, Max Brand.
I spent more money on energy drinks at the gas station today than any of these books cost, and people are acting like it's this big financial decision. You know?
Well, the book I just finished is 82,000 words.
All right.
And I purposely am making my Westerns shorter because that's what, even today, the Western market wants, is a short read that can be read in 1 day.
Right? Yeah.
See, what is the state of the modern Western? I've never really read a Western novel. I know it was dominated by a few big names for a long time, or at least it seems like it was. What does it look like today for Westerns? Is it still traditionally published? Is it all indie, Kindle Direct type thing? How is the Western genre today?
I would say it's pretty much a hybrid, Mike. You've got people that are professional. There are still publishers that publish Western. Obviously, L'Amour, Zane Grey, Max Brand, a number of other authors, they get republished all the time. So it's like, who was complaining last week?
Well, that
Somebody
narrows
was
it down.
complaining about they were competing in the bookstores with dead guys.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. So she was complaining about Tolkien, and that was actually like last year, but it comes up every now and then.
Tolkien and Robert Jordan.
Yeah. But it's like I have yet to hear a Western author complain about competing with like Louis L'Amour or which guy? Who's the guy that hates
Gray, Max
punctuation?
Brand.
Honestly, it's still
Cormac McCarthy.
The hubris of to imagining you're some nobody, and you're to imagine that you're competing with Tolkien. Like, no, you're not.
Not even close.
But westerns are still alive. They are a niche, probably more so than both science fiction, because the same thing happened with westerns that happened with science fiction when all the fanzines went away and the men's magazines went away. That was where people got their start, or that's where you started seeing serialized. L'Amour, Zane Grey, they were all serialized, back in the day in the various men's magazines. And most of them were,
That's a collection of the original serialized versions.
But they were maybe 40,000, 50,000 words.
And what strikes me as interesting about the Western is that both in literature and in film and on television, it was the penultimate American genre for decades, from like the turn of the 20th century all the way into like the 60s and 70s when it started to wane in popularity.
Well, then the Italians saved it. You're welcome, Mike.
Actually, the turn of the 19th century, really, Mike.
And
because most of the Penny Dreadfuls were Western.
Most of the first movies or even moving pictures were Western.
Yeah.
And it was, for the longest time, like the biggest thing people associated with American culture was cowboys.
Yeah.
And it was just the dominant genre in so many things of pop culture for the longest time. And then it just kind of burned itself out. It never went away, and I don't think it never will go away because it is a permanent part of American culture. But it's just interesting that it was so pervasive and so widespread in everything, and it just kind of.
Well, because at those times, that was still kind of the American identity.
Yes.
It's like we had a West.
Yeah.
Well, like, the only other people that had a Western frontier were the Australians. They can't read. So it just worked out that way. But
they had friends down there that would
if they had internet down there, they'd be very offended.
But one thing you got to realize,
past their bedtime. So they'll wake up in a couple hours and be very upset.
No, actually, it's almost noon there.
Yeah. But they're lazy. They don't get up.
It's not a real country anyway. Who cares?
But what you got to realize is the cowboy era only really lasted about 25 years. From the late 1860s to the early 1880s, 1890s. And that was it.
With the frontier era, yeah. But even into the early 20th century, there were some parts of America that were pretty rowdy. And even today, cattle is big business in the US. And even where I live in Minnesota, this isn't the West. I mean, it's western Minnesota. We're west of the Mississippi, but it's not. No one's going to mistake this for where a Western would be set. But there are cattle farms all over the place around here.
Yeah.
But I was going somewhere with that, and it's gone. Forgive me. It's very early this morning. So
what I was saying though is the frontier was the American identity, and it was like that way before the cowboy era, as Jim pointed out, even came about. Because what were the most popular international books from America before the cowboy era? It was the Frontiersman, Pioneer, James Fenimore Cooper, sort of, those kinds of books.
Yeah, before the cowboy, there was the the mountain man,
Yeah, the fur trapper and all that. And that
Lewis and Clark.
because the European market, that they didn't have that kind of stuff in theirs. It was either African safaris or what was ever going on in the New World.
And for them, that was like reading stories from people who have colonized a new planet, as far as they were concerned. Yeah. So
there's also the Western really started to wane in the 60s and 70s. Well, you saw some, particularly in Hollywood, you saw an active attempt to subvert the Western.
Well, that was it wasn't just the Western, it was anything rural. During the 70s, they actively canceled very popular, high-rated, rural-based TV shows like Little House on the Prairie and stuff like that to bring in this urban stuff. And that's where you got a lot of like the 70s sitcoms and Different Strokes, stuff like that. The Jeffersons. There was an active campaign in Hollywood to change the cultural popularity from rural to urban. So
Gunsmoke, up until a couple of years ago, was the longest running TV program ever.
Now what is it?
It ran 20 years.
Is it The Simpsons now?
Oh, it's either that or like a soap opera or something like that.
No, it's The Simpsons now.
Oh, all right.
But Gunsmoke, to your point, Coop, was literally canceled without warning.
Yep.
They were planning on coming back. They never had a last episode.
Yeah, I want my F Troop back. They took it from me. And
Larry Storch. Oh God. Yeah, those were fun because, they made fun of each other, and they had fun with the characters.
F Troop was MASH before MASH.
Oh yeah.
I'm kidding. I didn't watch that much F Troop. I was raised off of like TV Land and all that shit because we didn't get many channels. But so I didn't even know Gilligan's Island was not a current show when I watched it.
Thank you. You're making me feel even older than I am.
I was like, why are some of these episodes in black and white and the others in color? It's just why did they name these characters in this intro but call them and the rest in the others? That's just.
Oh, it could be worse for the Professor and Marianne. I remember when Dead Six first came out on Amazon, it was listed as the authors as Larry Correia and one more. It's like,
your pen name needs to be et al. So
you want more?
Now, Coop, a friend of mine, one of the kids that I mentored years ago, ended up marrying a girl from New Mexico. And they had lived so far out on the ranch that they didn't have a TV. And for her to get to school was about a 3-hour bus ride.
Right.
I mean, she was literally the last person on the bus route. She never saw TV until she went to college. And she fell in love with TV Land. It was like, and she's going back and watching these shows. Major Nielsen. Oh, God. Yeah. So she's going back and watching these shows and talking to her husband about it. And he has no idea what she's talking about because he never saw any of them. So she would call me up and go, I just watched this episode of I Love Lucy. I just watched this episode of The Honeymooners. I'm going, and your husband does not know what you're talking about, does he? No, as usual. Oh. But that was
which guy? That's for All Mankind show on Apple TV. That should have been called The Honeymooners. That would have been.
Yeah.
If they tried to like play it straight, like that Futurama bit where the Honeymooners is how we got to the moon.
Yeah.
But
the other thing you don't see is the comedy shows.
Yeah.
Jackie Gleason, Flip Wilson. Laugh-In.
they attempted to do late night like comedy shows up until recently, but look at comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They forgot to write jokes. So
Yeah.
I mean, Saturday.
We kind of discussed their version of comedy when we were talking to Dave Butler last month. The flippancy where it is assumed that the joke has already been made.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we went deep into the problem of snark, but the flip side of that coin, and it's just as bad, but it's the quirk, it's the quirkiness, that sort of characteristic. That's the only shit that people know how to write. It's snarkiness and quirkiness, and they think that's going to carry whatever property they're introducing, because people don't write books anymore; they write Reddit posts.
Being weird and being a prick by themselves are not personalities.
Well, they are. They're just terrible.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, which about Mike and I were talking about this, where it's like I described a character from a book that I was exposed to. And I was like, this character is awful, and this is what this author thinks when is a good character when he writes it. And Mike's like, no, that's a real character. That's a real person. Like, I know plenty of them. And it's like, yeah, but it's nobody I want to read a book about.
Yeah. Everybody knows people like that. They don't make good main characters because they're that person in the office that everybody hates. You know, they're the toxic people you're forced to work with.
So when you have that one reader that's like, oh my God, I love them because they're just like me. It's like, yeah, that's why nobody else likes them though.
Yeah. You're the one who makes work miserable. You're the reason somebody can't have a nice Sunday because they're worried about going to work the next day.
The other thing is, I don't have a Reddit account. I've never had a Reddit account. If I wanted to read a Reddit post, I can do that for free. Don't charge me to fucking read a 50,000 word Reddit post. So.
Well, I don't know where Substack is going. Yeah, the dialogue is old short form Twitter post and commentary. Yeah.
Substack is the 180,000 word version of that.
Wasn't it you the other day, Coop, that was asking if there was some sort of commitment to that you had to certify that you were a long-winded douchebag?
Is that part of the end user license agreement for like when you get a Substack account? Is you just have to be self-indulgent as all hell?
Well, it's because you're on Substack because your opinions are they're too dissident for social media. You're being censored and shadow banned, so you got to put them on Substack. So you got to put them on there a lot.
No, the 280 character limit goes for everybody. It's not just censorship.
Listen.
Yeah.
Oh man. The book we were talking about was called Artemis, and it was by best-selling, Oscar award-winning author Andy Weir. He came to prominence because of The Martian. Yeah. And even when I read the book, I was like, all right, this is okay. His writing style is terrible, but it's basically just a repeat of that one scene from Apollo 13 where they have to like scramble to fix something with whatever they have available. And I like that. He did the math. Yeah, I like that scene. I was like, all right, this is cool. And then he kept writing books, but it was just his writing style and not that anymore. And I was just like, wow, this is like the worst of both worlds. And
did you ever read Ready Player One?
Oh, I hate that book. I hated that book when it came out. I hate everybody who likes that book.
The closest I've come to reading or hearing Ready Player One was about a half an hour, 372 pages. We'll never get back. And that was enough.
They just did Artemis. But so I looked into Andy Weir, like back when I first read the book and watched the movie and all that stuff. I was like, wow, the movie was way better than the book. And then I found out that he would write a little bit. He started out as it was like a series of fictional blog posts. Like he would just post them on his blog, basically writing them like the old serials, only instead of a magazine, it's his own website.
Yeah.
But people who were interested in that stuff found it, and they would leave comments correcting him on everything he got wrong. And then he would edit it and change it so that he got it right. So flash forward to so when he's done the story and then it gets picked up for publishing and all that stuff, and then it's a great success. And we're like, wow, this guy's really smart. He came up with all these new ways. Like, no, he crowdsourced his successful book. It was basically he had 1,000 alpha readers for free that were all in NASA anyways, and then when he had to go it alone, there was just a serious dip in quality. And Ready Player One is apparently his favorite book ever. I remember hearing that in his one of his interviews. And then I looked into Ready Player One, and that's how I found out how terrible it was. And between Ready Player One or any of those, like if you die in the game, you die in real life, and it's all virtual reality stuff. I was like,
yeah,
Spy Kids 3 did it first and did it better, and that movie was terrible. That's all it is. I saw the trailers for the Ready Player One movie. I was like, this is the race scene from Spy Kids 3D. Robert Rodriguez beat all through it. Like, and that one had Sylvester Stallone and Ricardo Montalban. Like, you ain't beating that shit, Spielberg. Sorry.
Well, you talk about him getting help from his readers. I do the same thing. I post snippets on the blog.
Alpha reading's fine, but like don't put on a flat cap and act like you're a genius because you know your alpha readers basically wrote the book for you.
Hell, I give them credit. But you know, the difference is, at least my perspective, your alpha and beta readers really are the ones that make the book. Because I've got about 20 folks between my alpha and beta readers from a variety of backgrounds and businesses. And every one of them picks up something different. So they help me make the book better. And I am sure as hell not going to complain about that. And once they get through fixing it, then I give it to my editor and just tell her to put the comments wherever the hell she wants to.
I mean, I guess that's
English
fair.
is not my strong suit.
Well, let me put it this way. His alpha readers for his next books took a major downgrade because his follow-on books were terrible. I haven't read his third one, but I hear it's just more of the same as The Martian. That's why everybody likes it better.
Yeah.
I saw a post where somebody was responding to his one of his Facebook posts, and it's like, hey, when are you going to do another book? Because I loved The Martian and Project Hail Mary. Just did not mention the second book he wrote because that was absolute dog shit. And it was saying the quiet part out loud. Evil Penguin said that Ready Player One was sort of amusing to see how the cultural references were used, but that's about it. The cultural references weren't used; they were just listed.
Yeah.
It's like everybody compares it to the Family Guy reference humor, but that's not what it was. It was the kid when you were in grade school or whoever who saw a movie and quoted a funny line from it, and everybody laughed, and now he's the funny kid. He didn't come up with a joke. He doesn't have comedic timing. He's just quoting something that you all already found funny. But at that point, you're young and naive and stupid enough that you just think, oh, he's the funny kid. So that's all the references were. It's a list of references.
There is this this section in Ready Player One in the book where here's the deal, Wade thing. It's like a few paragraphs long where it's just this nihilistic kind of like screed about how terrible the world is and how meaningless life is. And I think it represents the viewpoint of a lot of young people these days. Very cynical, beyond cynical. It is nihilistic, and I don't think it's healthy. And I think it's kind of look, if you're an author and you got rich off of this book and you're sitting there writing books, hand-wringing about how terrible the world is, just stop it, okay? Yeah, tell us how bad it is from your big mansion.
Well, it's funny, too, because it's kind of it's not intentional. Like, what's his name? Ernest Cline didn't intend to hit the mark on it, but he kind of did by accident because everybody complains about how the world is terrible. And it's like, oh, it's post-apocalyptic and it's a dystopia and that stuff. It's like, I don't know, man. Everybody has like better internet than we could ever hope for, and they're buying stuff online and it's delivered by Amazon drone and that stuff, and you have all the time in the world to just play a video game.
Yeah.
It's like, you're doing all right. I mean, and it's like, oh, but it's terrible because the trailers are just stacked on top of each other. It's like, yeah, that makes absolutely no sense, and they would never do that in real life because that's stupid. It's like,
is that really any worse than the apartment building you probably live in? I mean,
have you been to Florida lately? I've seen 2-story trailers down there.
yeah, they don't have
7
7-story trailers though because the storms would knock them all over. But it's also, it's like you're not that cramped for space. Like if you're living in a trailer, it's because you're not in the giant urban area that's stacked on top of each other. But it's like they have corporate fucking headquarters that are like, 300 stories tall, and they're worried about like the stock market and that stuff. It was like, this is the least apocalyptic apocalypse I've seen. You know what I mean? It's like, this isn't like Blade Runner where it's like there's a giant exodus from Earth and everybody is surrounded by like nuclear kibble. You know what I mean? So,
I mean, they make some, but they've got a good. There are a lot of young people out there who think the world is going to be uninhabitable by the time they're old, and it's
because the not young people keep telling them that.
Yeah, I think you're going to be disappointed by being disappointed. I don't know.
Not only that, but they don't get their way. Everything's a participation trophy now. They don't know how to fail and pick their ass up and go on.
All right. If you're going to go off about participation trophies, you got to do it in your truck. That's the
rule. There seems to be a tendency in some of these fantasy, science fiction, dystopian sort of stories. I tend to blame it on people who don't have a lot of real experience with any kind of hardship or adversity, where they come up with this idea of how the world has gone this dystopian route that makes absolutely no friggin' sense.
God.
Because there's no correlation with any part of human history where this actually works this way.
I mean, I find the dystopian setting fascinating in so many ways. And I've seen some really interesting ones, and I've seen some really terrible ones too. But I think, remember when all the YA dystopian, post-apocalyptic dystopian novels came out because Hunger Games made it big, and then all the wannabe successors came out after them, and they all tried to have this weird post-apocalyptic society based around some gimmick. That's
kind of what
it was based around the Gryffindor hat or whatever. The hat where it's like your one personality trait from a BuzzFeed quiz. That's your past in life now.
Yet they made a trilogy of movies based off of those books.
Pete, you remember that gamer girl author at LTUE?
Yep.
Oh, God.
So
Larry was afraid we were going to come unglued and come after her ass.
Is this the I know what combat is like because I did raids in World of Warcraft?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
Larry's double face palm got to about here, and he stopped himself, looked over at Jim and I were sitting in the front row when she said this, and just, wait, what?
Well,
Larry looks over at us and just, talk to somebody who's been there and knows what they're talking about.
Oh, God.
So, I mean, Pete, you've mentioned this before, where a lot of like the post-apocalyptic stuff, it comes from when the genre first kind of started getting popular with the rampant crime waves in the 60s and 70s. And so every like sort of post-apocalyptic media or genre after that was based off like we're going to have these roving gangs of ultra violent, you know, bikers or whatever.
Oh, like
Biker
Chicago and
cannibals.
New York today.
Yeah, but I'd say like the Death Wish 3 sort of biker gang where it's like they all wear the same like tattoos and paint and all that stuff. And
I
it's
mean,
apocalyptic, but they all have the coolest leather jackets.
there was a series of low budget Italian movies based about how
Escape
bad
from the Bronx.
was.
Yeah.
And if you look at some like archival footage of the Bronx from the late 70s and early 80s, it looked like Berlin after World War II.
Yeah.
Right. So I can see how the Italians got that idea. I don't know how they got from there to there being like tap dancing themed gangs though. But
to get to the point though, is that like, yeah, it was based off of the extrapolation of, with barely any like law enforcement to contain these people. Like we can't even contain them with the law enforcement we have now. If there was no law, then they would just run rampant. And so the apocalypse will lead to this ultra violent, you know, ruined cities with just all these gangs going in and just killing everybody. And that has continued through a lot when like the Walking Dead and the zombie genre got big again in the like 2010s. You know, it was the same stuff. It was like these survivors are going to be so atavistic and violent, and it's all about like kill whoever's not in the group and take all their stuff and all that. But when it really comes down to it, like most of these apocalypse scenarios, they really only revert to the world to where it was like pre-internet, right? Or was like pre-electronic communication, to the point, and like electronic power grids, to the point where it'd be like, nah, it's kind of like the Old West frontier. And while you did have roving bands of you know, lawless ruffians, you also had posses and town militias that countered them, and you had this sense
And vigilantes.
yeah, and you had like kids weren't on, you know, Discord servers and playing video games all day. They had to go out and interact with other kids. You actually had to be more socially mutually beneficial to other people and you know, like actually interact with people on a beneficial level than what we would see in the old post-apocalyptic movies and books where everybody's at each other's throats and it's like Fallout or whatever.
well,
You know what I mean?
sooner or later, you kill everybody. There's nobody left. You know, it's.
But it's also, you can't rebuild civilization by yourself, and even if you want to live as a hermit, like you can't defend your little hut from all these, you know, roving aggressors. You can't plant food to sustain yourself like throughout the entire year by yourself, even if you have like a sizable garden. Like you do need a community.
And when push comes to shove, like when it's a matter of survival, people are willing to just kind of like, all right, let's just get along so we don't get murdered. Yeah. Okay, people are willing to put up with a lot to just not get murdered. You know,
it's like Robert Howard said that the civilized man is more impolite than the savage because he knows he can insult you without getting punched in the face or your head lopped off. So,
well, that's, I think, part of the problem today.
Not enough beheadings.
When I was growing up, you know, there was no computer. So if you said something to somebody, you realistically could get punched in the face if they didn't like it.
Or beheaded.
But now people hide behind a keyboard.
Yeah. People hide behind the keyboard, but it's also, it's the parasocial, everybody learns socialized skills through parasocial interactions, or, you know, because like how much of human communication is body language and, you know, reading somebody's facial expressions or the tone of voice, all the stuff you don't get from interacting with somebody over just text. No. So in like a post-apocalyptic society or era where you don't have electronic communication, you don't have like powered appliances and stuff like that, and you don't have the internet and that stuff, and the only people that you can really interact with, you have to interact with real life, and you're both, you know, you exist in the same area to support each other mutually. people are going to be more socialized properly, and people are going to be acting like the communities that were on the frontier in the American West. You know, it's not going to be as dystopian as a lot of the post-apocalyptic stuff is, and we're certainly not going to be like, hey, we need a computer person. Now, you're really good with tech, but you have an aggressive personality, so you're going to be a warrior instead. This girl who is a wallflower, we're going to make you the computer person, even though you are tech illiterate, because your personality is a certain way. So.
Well, I don't remember which book it was, but Louis L'Amour had an historical note in front of one of his novels where he basically pointed out that the trope of the outlaw gang taking over the town never really happened in real life, because most of the people in that town, particularly the men at that particular point in time, most of them were Civil War veterans who weren't going to put up with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like,
I know which one you're talking about. And I can't think of the name of it.
You had more problems from.
I want to say it was one of the sex novels, but I don't remember which one.
Yeah. Realistically, you need a big gang to do something like that. And the problem with having a big gang is you have a big footprint. That's a lot of mouths to feed. That's a lot of stuff to steal. That's drawing a lot of attention to yourself. How do you hide a big gang? You know, where do you go? You're going to get noticed more. It makes for a good story hook, but I don't know if it's not. It struck me as one of those things that probably never actually happened.
Especially if you wear the uniforms of like the red sash so that everybody can identify you.
Yeah.
Well, Vera is not worried about the food they're going to eat this winter. He's worried about the food they haven't eaten for the last 10 days.
Yeah. Well, think about deployment.
Or it's like it wasn't like in Red Dead Redemption 2 where the that one gang had apparently hundreds of members because I shot hundreds of them. So
yeah. But think about what you did on deployment. Recruiting. You know, how many people were you intimately around for 6 months, 7 months at a time, day in, day out? You know, and how many of those people did you get along with? Did you not get along with? I know for us back in the day, it was, 12-man crew, and you were together as a crew for basically a year to 18 months. And when we deployed, all 7 enlisteds stayed in the same room. Well, these were open bay barracks rooms, no air conditioning, and you lived together day in, day out, flew together day in, day out. And I'm going to tell you, at the end of 6 months, you were tired of seeing those sumbitches. But you knew everything there was to know about them. You knew what they liked. You knew what they hated. You knew whether or not you could trust them to get drunk or not get drunk, depending on whether they was a duty driver or not. And it's like the combat buddies.
Yeah, you'd also go to the floor for them. Like if push came to shove, if somebody that you didn't know came in and just merely insulted one of your guys, like you'd be going to blows.
Oh yeah, it's on right then.
That's what I think. A lot of these stories.
50 years later, those guys could call me up. I would drop what I'm doing and go help them today. And that's been 50 years ago.
Like we were saying, that's what I think a lot of these stories and these settings misses, the ability of people to bond and form communities. And just how familiarity and being in an adverse situation together can strengthen, human relationships like that. Even between people who are strangers, even if you don't even have that much in common, you put people who struggle through something together and they get through it together. They're not all going to be friends, but a lot of them are, so, and hey, you're back.
Yeah.
Well, we are actually past the 2-hour mark here, so it's probably time to wrap it up anyhow. So, Jim.
Were you going to go longer if I stayed gone?
No.
Well, I really appreciate you guys having me on. It's
not at all. Jim, tell us what you got
coming out. See y'all.
What you working on? What you got coming out now? What's your new book?
Rimworld Diversions went live yesterday. It's already up to number 12 in colonizations, military science fiction, so I'll take that. I've got 4 short stories due by the end of August, and I'm about 6,000 words into the next 1870s Western series.
This man does not let any moss grow beneath him.
No.
Hell, I'm an old fart. I got to write it now before I keel over. We're not like you young kids.
It's not the age, it's the mileage.
Yeah.
Oh, let's not talk about mileage.
And Pete, you got something coming out soon, don't you? Or did you finish something?
I'm closing in on finishing Frontiers of Chaos, the 4th Palace Group Solutions thriller. My Order of the Centurion book has gone to the Galaxy's Edge Insiders a few days ago. That should hopefully be coming out in October.
All right.
And I'll be starting a new military science fiction series with Wargate Nova once I get done with Frontiers of Chaos. Oh, and I will, if anybody is going, I'm going to be at the Galaxy's Edge Fan Expo in Whidbey Island next week.
Oh, super.
So
That doesn't sound like a real place.
Whidbey Island or
Oh, it
Galaxy's
is.
Edge?
Wimpy Island?
Whidbey
Whidbey.
Island, yeah.
Oh.
Naval Air Station, Whidbey Island.
Most people don't know this, but Coop is a VTuber. He's just very high resolution, good graphics.
I don't have the cat ears for it, though.
that's a filter.
Oh, yeah. It's a reverse of that lawyer thing. I actually am a cat.
Well, folks, it's been fun, but we're past 2 hours, and I, for one, had a very early start today. So I think all of us have kind of had a long day here. So we are going to call it. To say good night. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for participating in the chat.
Here's your trophy.
Our handful of loyal fans who are here every month, we really appreciate you guys. We really do.
And go buy our books.
Tell your friends.
Feed us.
Bring some people next time. Yeah.
Wow. All right. We'll see y'all next month, and we are out.
Thank you.